You had replied, there was like a chain of emails. You had replied and sent the uh
It's in
the
your
plan, your notes and the plan. It was an email from Bessie at the beginning of that chain.
yes. Okay. I just found it a few minutes ago to get on here. So let me that
And
it?
then you
There we
lost it
go.
again. You
Yes,
sound
I
like Delta. You
did.
sound like Delta.
Okay, there we go. All
All
right.
right, I see we are live. So we will call the meeting to order. This is the Monday, July 29th meeting of the Sustainable BC Committee, starting at 1:33 p.m. Um, let's go around real quick and introduce ourselves. I'll just call in people. We have a guest. We have Matthew Katz from ICLEI here with us. So we'll just kind of go around just to get a lay of the land, who people are, who's community volunteer, who's staff, just say your name, where you're zooming in from, and look what your connection is to the committee. So I'll start. I'm Andy Humboldt, a community volunteer, zooming in from my home in the city of Battle Creek. Patty?
Patty Hilk Meluish, Environmental Department, City of Battle Creek, zooming in from DPW in Battle Creek.
All right, Bessie?
Bessie. Oops,
Whoa.
sorry.
Oh, you're
Okay.
what?
Bessie Steers, zooming in from DPW, here in Battle Creek.
Yeah, only one of you will be able to talk at a time if that's how you're gonna do it. Back to back. Chris Martin.
Yes, I know there's a few. Yeah, Chris Martin, urban planner with Battle Creek Unlimited, calling in from my office in Battle Creek.
All right, Bob.
I'm Bob Gilbert. I'm a community volunteer calling in from my office in Battle Creek.
All right, Kathy.
I'm here, just couldn't find my button. Kathy Antea, regular member, resident, calling in from my house in Battle Creek.
Thank you. Brienne.
Hello, Brianne Humphreys calling in from City Hall. Learning communications right here with Jessica and Eric.
Oh, great. Welcome, Brienne.
Thank you.
Ryan.
Ryan Ranke with Callan Conservation District, zooming in from office in Marshall, Michigan.
Great. And Matthew, do you go by Matthew or Matt?
Either is fine. You can call me Matthew. Make it
All right,
easiest.
then go.
Yeah, Matthew Katz, Senior Program Officer, calling from ICLEI USA, or rather from ICLEI USA, calling in from Chicago.
All right. Well, welcome. We will get on with that. Kind of your document is the main event here. So let's just check in. Shoot, I didn't even pull up the agenda. Do we have something else? I know we had meeting minutes. Let me
I think well, this is just a special meeting to talk about the greenhouse gas inventory. So I don't.
Okay, then we can, if we want to just hold the minutes for the last meeting and this meeting to the next regular meeting, we can, and we can just have the discussion. Is that the intention, Patty? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Bessie sent an actual agenda that I am currently ignoring.
Yes, let's just talk about the report today.
All right, then let me turn it over to you. Or just one more person joined. Commissioner Ballard, do you want to just introduce yourself, name and who you are and where you're zooming from? You're on mute, Roger.
Roger Ballard, Commissioner, Battle Creek.
Thank you. All right, Patty, then go ahead if you want to lead us off and say what we're doing here.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks for joining me today. We just wanted to kind of put the finishing touches on the greenhouse gas inventory. And I think there was a little bit of confusion the last time we met that this is strictly just an inventory of where we currently stand with our emissions in the community, and not this is the next step towards the climate action plan. So we're going to have some next steps for sure beyond this. So I think we are kind of looking for more from this initial report. Kind of, there was some confusion last time, I think. So I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. And then I invited Matthew to come today because he can answer any technical questions. He's the one that put this report together for us and gathered all the data and did all the calculations. So where we stood, and I can share my screen and bring up the report where we stand here, maybe. Okay, I'm gonna do. There it is. Okay. Can you see the report here?
Yep.
Okay, this is the one, yes, with all the, is this the most current one? I think, Matthew, I could pull up the Canva one. Maybe I should do that. Hang on a sec.
Yeah, whatever works for you.
Okay.
Just with everyone should understand that it's not completely finalized yet, so there's a lot of red text still in there to be addressed once you all do your final review.
I don't know if this is the latest one. Anyway, we didn't change much. So since we last saw this, but I think what our questions were, how we wanted to address our goals, which are on page, basically it's the science-based targets that are on page.
Like 19 or 20 or something.
Yeah.
I did look at the agenda, and Bessie did include like a list of questions or points to cover in the agenda.
And then, so we had talked about how we want to leave our goals, basically. For the Paris Agreement, it's recommended that we talk about the 50% reduction by 2030 and then climate neutrality by 2050. That's pretty ambitious. And so, but we talked about, we want to be ambitious potentially, I think. And so, Matthew, if you just want to kind of go over what our options might be here and what that all really means, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, thanks everyone for having me. Nice to meet you all. So a couple things on the science-based targets and targets in general. So we really like to, and maybe I should explain like just a very short intro to ICLEI. Would that help? Okay, so so everybody, I'm on our technical team at ICLEI. ICLEI is a nonprofit. We're actually a global nonprofit. We have offices in over 20 countries. I represent and I work for the U.S. chapter, so we support local governments, whether you're a town or a city, municipality, county, or regional government. We support all local governments in a variety of manners. One, mitigation focus. So this is reducing greenhouse gases. And part of these services, again, are doing inventory or supporting climate action planning and mitigation modeling. We provide a lot more support across other pathways, as we call them, such as with circularity, which usually involves the waste stream. We do resilience and adaptation planning, things like that. So I won't go into the details, but feel free to ask about it if you'd like. As it relates to this, so what we're using here is our greenhouse gas inventory report that we use for all these related services. So we always like to end the report or close out the report with some type of commitment or at least statement regarding the science-based targets or a target. So really what this means is a target. Really what we're saying here is a target to reduce greenhouse gases to a certain level by a certain date. As it relates to a science-based target, so a science-based target is basically a target in line with the global commitment, with a global commitment of getting 50% by 2030, reducing 50% by 2030 from a baseline to 0 by 2050. That's an oversimplification, so I can certainly dive into the details as needed. I can certainly provide you with more details as needed, but just note that that's kind of what we're going for here. Now, Patty mentioned about the higher ambition. So, in the U.S. context, these science, or really the global context, these science-based targets are adjusted to account for responsibility and ability. Meaning, in industrialized countries like our country, Canada, Germany, etc., All of our targets, our science-based targets, are actually higher than 50% because of the global need for industrialized nations like the US to do more, and because of our ability to do more. So we have a few options here. And Patty, you wanted me to discuss like options as it relates to what we can add, what we can communicate on this in this report.
Right. I just wanted this group to be I sent you Matthew's 2 suggestions. It's just a little bit of tweaking with the wording basically, and I can
Mhm.
want me to pull that up, Matthew? I have your email.
Sure. Yeah. Why not?
Okay,
Why
let's
not?
do
And I can
that.
give an introduction as we're doing it. So really,
Okay.
the 3 things we're trying to decide on is 1, either committing to a 2030 ambitious science-based target. And I can provide my recommendations and what I generally suggest. 2, going for 50%. And 3, suggesting like an alternative, which is like the second option here. Which again, in my recommendation, we're constantly we have continuously recommended ambitious targets because it promotes the need to make these types of changes. There's a whole other reasoning around that, but mostly it relates to pushing ambitious actions on businesses and constituents in order to show that you are that you are all collectively committed to addressing these global and local goals, and the global issue of climate change. Yeah, so again, I also mentioned to Patty and Bob that while these are ambitious, it's most important to get your constituents, your community, your stakeholders, the entire community on board with this plan. So it's kind of like a back and forth of, do we want to communicate an ambitious target in order to push the agenda forward? Do we want to kind of slow down on that in order to make sure people feel like it's more realistic? So again, I'm just offering you these as options and the way I would communicate them, but it's up to you all. I'd recommend you all kind of meet to decide on what you think is best for your community to push your community forward. So I wrote these out to provide this context. Yeah, maybe Patty, you want to take it from there just to kind of keep introducing this?
Yes. So, and I also think what's really important based on, this is a lot to think about, but there's also something called the business as usual forecast, which I think ties into this really. So, and I'll let Matthew kind of take it from here too, but there's a page in the document called business as usual, which means that if we don't really do anything, other than business as usual, basically, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll try to
Thank
explain it a little bit. Yeah. So the reason Patty's mentioning the business as usual, so what this is a business as usual projection. Maybe Patty, you could share your screen while we're discussing it with the report where it is.
Yep.
So what we did is, since Battle Creek is an ICLEI member, whenever we do these greenhouse gas inventory services for them, we also provide pro bono services where we do where we provide a presentation, which will be an end deliverable that we'll deliver to Patty, as well as a couple other things, including a basic business as usual projection. So what that projection is we project the emissions and emissions inducing activities into the future, 2030, 2040, 2050, whatever it may be. And those are based on programs and policies that are currently enacted. So we're not trying to predict the future based on changes. We're just trying to predict what the underlying projections may be based on what's currently going on. So what we do is we consider the Michigan state laws on the renewable portfolio standards. We consider federal fuel efficiency standards, and we also consider things like population change, and therefore predict, or to our best ability, project what emissions and activities will be. So the reason Patty brought that up is because the second option that I emailed for that language change brings the business as usual projection and into the conversation and relates it to the science-based target, or to the target in general. So really the communication here is, you may need to reduce, you'll need to reduce by a certain percentage, but based on this projection, this preliminary basic projection, a lot of this reduction is already taking place, whether it's related to a cleaner energy grid or federal fuel efficiency standards, things like that. So we're basically saying you need to go this far. However, your projection projects you to be already this far. So you really only have to make up the difference. Now I'm saying that just to make it, just to make it extremely clear how we're looping the projection into this conversation. But there's also, it's important in the text that I sent to Patty does do this. It's important to realize that you can't just rely on a projection to assume you'll get to a certain point. You need to empower your constituents and business owners and the government itself to take on these strategies and programs to reduce emissions further. So that's kind of where that email, that language suggestion comes in.
So I think we've talked about really feel strongly that we don't want to just rely on the changes, the solar farms and the energy, the gas, the better gas mileage to get to our goal. So we wanted to make sure that we have buy-in from the community and that we're doing other things to reduce our emissions. So that's kind of where we stand there. But does this all make sense to everybody? Are you have any other questions for Matthew? But I kind of we need to make a recommendation here, and then this again will go to City Commission after our recommendation. So ours won't be the final word, but we do.
Can I ask a clarifying question about the language? So when we talk about percentages, like these percentage numbers, that's the percent that by which we would have to reduce emissions, right?
Correct. Yes. So
and therefore the statement 0 by 2050, the implication, like, so then the percentage number there would be 100%, right? That would be a 100% reduction in. So if we're thinking about it, if we're presenting the numbers as, okay, if this is usual as 40, 62, but like if we're thinking about numbers, eventually the 2050 number is 100.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
We usually present an interim target as the percent reduction by that year. And then we typically, just because the way it communicates better, we typically present 0 by 2050, meaning 0 emissions by 2050.
Right. That makes sense. I just wanted to make sure that if we were taking the percentages all the way out, that was what the percentages meant. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Matt, let me ask another clarifying question on that point, Andy. This zero emissions is always a net zero. So are we talking about a city would have absolutely 0 emissions coming out of the city, or would it be there's a few residual emissions that might occur but can be accounted for with uptake through natural processes or something like that?
Yeah, great question. This is often a question we get. So yes, the 0 by 2050 is a net. You'll never, I mean, maybe if technology ever gets to this point, a city will never not be able to produce some amount of emissions. You produce organic material, and if that organic material, even if it is composted, produces some amount of emissions. Wastewater treatment is regardless of how good processes get, will emit emissions. Obviously, in extreme circumstances, we may get to a point where science, eliminates everything. But for now, in a realistic world, that is a net number, because it will be emissions regardless. But eventually, we're hoping to a point where all the emissions that you're able to fully reduce are reduced, and therefore the net is addressed by nature-based solutions, carbon sequestration. We never want to rely on, and I just add this because we never want to rely on carbon sequestration to get us to our goals. We always want to rely on it as like an afterthought. So again, the main things we want to do, and Patty, you can share the report. We in this report, we also provide very high level recommendations on strategies and programs to take on. So if you go to the Canva report, I can show you what I'm referring to. Yeah, but yeah, I guess as we're doing this, yeah, Bob, when we talk about zero, that is of course net. However, when we're talking about interim targets, it's really important again not to focus on the sequestration and the negative the removals of emissions, because again, I think I brought this extreme case up to you, Bob and Patty, and this is my reason onto why we never want to communicate net when it comes to these interim targets, is because in extreme circumstances, this is arbitrary, but again, I use this as an extreme circumstance to communicate my thoughts, and is that you may have a community that produces 50,000 metric tons of emissions each year, but you have a community that they have a massive forest, right? That sequesters 250,000 metric tons. Therefore, you are net negative 200,000 metric tons. You never want to be at a point where you're like, all right, we're good to go. We have everything done. We're all good. We don't need to take on any more programs or strategies. So in that circumstance, and then if you apply that really to your circumstance, we never really want to rely on just the sequestration, but rather take on these different strategies. Patty, do you want me to share my screen to show them the strategies, or?
Are you not seeing my screen?
No.
Oh. Oh, hang on.
Happy to share if you want. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Yep. So if you scroll down a bit, or maybe I don't exactly remember the page number that those are on. Yeah, right there. So in terms of next steps, in terms of strategies, when I say strategies and programs, what I really mean is any option, any pathway to reduce emissions. So for on-road transportation, an example of this is electric vehicle implementation, adoption. Obviously, that's kind of the transition, but there are things to do to get there, such as incentive programs, building public infrastructure, things like that. Another example, promoting energy efficiency in homes and businesses. Again, how do you get there? By providing rebate programs or incentives, or providing education and support systems, things like that. So we want to maintain the focus on these strategies and programs to reduce emissions. So that's why they're there.
And then do we want to talk at all about, I saw in some of the reports, a per capita emissions. Do you ever use that? Or would you recommend using that? Is there any value to it?
Yeah, so we communicate science-based targets in two ways. We do per capita and then absolute. The reason there are two is because globally, it was just a per capita target. However, because we represent a very diverse network of over 380 local governments, when we started initially in 2020, when we started providing these science-based targets under the Science-Based Target Initiative, we heard from a lot of our members, hey, this is great, but we are extremely oriented towards tourism, or we see a lot of seasonal change. So it's really hard for us to base it on per capita when a large portion of our emissions are coming from tourism. So from there, we decided to amend and create our own process to provide these science-based targets, which considers the population change. And therefore, we provide the absolute. So if you are going to choose a science-based target, which I always recommend, I would recommend you stick to the absolute, which is the one I've been communicating on this report.
Okay.
It gets a little confusing for people that aren't involved in this type of work on a daily basis when you bring both in. So I'd recommend the absolute. Yeah.
Okay. Nope, that's helpful. And then could you explain again, it's been a while ago, how the commercial kind of takes in the industrial. We talked about, because our largest emissions is coming from commercial. And we talked about, was it because of the SEMCO data? Was that what did it? Or I'm trying to remember here.
Yes, good question. I'm scrolling down in the report right now to look at the appendix tables, just because, okay, so it says the commercial electricity does include industrial electricity,
Okay.
hospitals, universities, things like that, public buildings. And then, yeah, Yeah,
Okay.
so it's really just the electricity that's being grouped together. And this is pretty normal. I wouldn't say it happens. It's probably like a 50-50 where a utility communicates or aggregates the commercial and industrial data together. It's either based on the way they internally track it, based on transparency laws that they can't really separate them due to some law or another reason. But so this is pretty normal.
Okay, all right. Well, this was helpful. I hope the group, do you have any more questions for Matthew? We're so close. We just need to just kind of come to a consensus on what we want our target to be here. And
Yeah,
other,
one
yeah.
more question about that, the language in the current language where it mentions the science-based target of 62.9%. Then after that number, there's a 10 in brackets. I don't know what that 10, it looks like maybe it's like a reference to a footnote or something, but it didn't.
Yes, that references a footnote. Since this has not gone through our communications team yet, we wait for that final review at the end. Those types of things will be addressed so that we make sure the footnote is reflecting accurately. We're strictly doing that just to make sure we keep note of what footnotes we need to add.
Okay.
Yep. Patty, again, and I'm happy to stay for as long as you need me, especially if you need me to stay the whole hour just to answer questions on the fly. Happy to do so. And I don't want to take up too much of the agenda for something that's not related directly to this report, but if it does help, I can also explain like the next steps that we'd recommend a community go through, how we can be of support, things like that. Just let me know. Happy to dive into anything you'd like.
I think it'd be great as long as you're here, if the group's okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So again, and I actually mentioned this at the bottom of the report, so you can feel free to read through this, but right now where you're at is a really good point where, again, once you have finalized the inventory, you'll have that baseline to base your climate action planning off of, assuming you all want to dive into that, which obviously we would recommend because the end result is that emissions reduction. But outside of that, so much more cost reduction, improved resilience, efficiency upgrades, things like that, better public health, whatnot. I can dive into that topic for hours, but what we would recommend after this is improving the forecast, the projections that we provided you all, which by improving, I mean, again, we did a basic one as a pro bono option, but we'd recommend including more sector-based data to project better. So instead of projecting commercial growth on population, project commercial growth on business-related projections, something like that. After the forecast, we recommend you start going through the climate action planning process. So that means getting a group together, a task force, which is, I assume, would be with this group, starting an engagement plan to engage your communities. Then, if you want to dive into adaptation, we would recommend doing adaptation and mitigation together. A little bit longer and more difficult process, but highly necessary as we are starting to feel extreme heat events and rain events and things like that. So we definitely would recommend incorporating that. But as it relates to my work on the emissions and mitigation side, we recommend you start diving into planning, which really means figuring out what strategies are viable at your level, which greenhouse gas reducing strategies are viable at your local level. What's viable to get support from the state or county on, and then actually model those strategies to see what the potential impacts may be. If you were to, convert or improve the energy efficiency of X number of houses each year, what is that impact on greenhouse gases each year? What is that impact on public health? Things like that. If you were to add solar panels on all government buildings, what is the greenhouse gas reduction potential there? What are the other benefits there? So, again, these strategies are endless as it relates to public transportation, private transportation, freight, electricity, natural gas phase out, solid waste, things like that. They're endless, and we can support you in that effort. We as a nonprofit that acts as a consultant, but also a membership network, we, as a member, there are a great amount of benefits that we provide to you all to do this climate action planning, providing very specific and very detailed guidance on the process, providing spreadsheets and worksheets and planning sheets, things like that to help you in the process, as well as our Clear Path tool, which helps you model these emissions reduction strategies. So again, there's endless. I don't want to dive into it too much right now, but happy to provide further information later on as needed. Yeah, and I guess one more thing closing out, we would really recommend this. Again, a lot of times our ICLEI members, obviously their priority is greenhouse gas reduction, which is a huge priority. But outside of that opportunity, these climate action plans, they really bring forth and really showcase the ability to affect other things. Again, as I mentioned, reducing the energy costs for your communities, for your community members and your businesses. Improving reliance from the central grid, especially as we see more and more grid failures and more expensive costs. We're actually working with another somewhat Western Michigan city right now. They're an ICLEI member, and they've been communicating that there will be a rapid rise in energy costs. So part of their planning is going to be considering how to deter people away from those from the centralized grid and purchase solar, or purchase to a solar program, things like that. So there is just a ton of great benefit that communities discover once they're going through this process. And again, we can help you discover those, help you plan for these types of things. We actually also, and I just want to plug that we just announced a partnership with a new platform that's going to that we view as the latest and greatest state of the art climate planner tool. And that will be available sometime next year. So it's, never been better to be an ICLEI member, because you'll get access to that state-of-the-art tool.
Matthew, I just have a quick question. Thank you for that. It's quite inspiring. Some of the challenges I'm sure you're well aware of is some of the people that have the highest utility costs, they might not actually own their homes, but are renters. And we do have a large income inequality issue within the city limits. Do you have any strategies for that when they're not the homeowners, when there's not really an incentive to invest in efficiencies if they're renting, or if they don't have permission to, and the landlords don't really seem to care because they're not the ones paying the bills? How do you bridge and overcome those gaps?
Yeah, it's a great question, and requires a long conversation, requires a long planning process. So, to answer your question, we work with members across the country in these types of issues. We work with them on incorporating these concepts and these strategies and these approaches in their climate action plan, and even outside of their climate action plan, maybe like a one-off engagement with landlords and whatnot. So we do have experience engaging these situations. So happy to also provide these examples outside of the call. But yeah, this is a huge thing, and this is not just specific to that issue. It kind of relates to a whole nother bucket of issues where the people that have the biggest ability to reduce don't see that as their responsibility, or a related situation. So yes, glad you asked the question. Happy to address this and provide examples as needed. But to answer your question, yeah, we deal with this all the time.
Thank you.
Matthew, how long does a typical climate action plan take, start to finish, would you say, for a Battle Creek?
Yeah, great question. I'm just trying to pull up, let's see. And I can share this with you, Patty, because again, all ICLEI resources, regardless if they're part of a cohort opportunity or not, are available to you all as members. So I can share this with you after the call, and then you can distribute this. And I'm going to share my screen real quick. And this is a presentation I give to our cohorts, but the climate action planning process, it seems like you already have a task force, but it really involves kind of two phases, two buckets of actions. One is the actual technical planning, so the emissions reduction modeling, and then the other phase is the community engagement, making sure that you incorporate them in your decision making, as well as better understanding their difficulties and how your strategies may benefit them, but also impact them in a negative way. So this process, it really depends on a variety of things. One, the availability and ability to work on this within the committee, your community's engagement, the tools that you have. Luckily, as an ICLEI member, we provide great tools. Our ClearPath tool has been named one of 2 best city planning tools for greenhouse gas reduction. So with those types of tools and our type of support, we've seen members take this on within a year. We've seen members do a year and a half or 2 years. It really just depends on how long you have to do this. Obviously, I cannot communicate more about how necessary it is to take this on as soon as possible. And again, I'm kind of dropping the membership here, but with this new tool that we'll be releasing, our goal is to make the modeling process, the technical part of this climate action plan process, extremely more efficient and about less than half the time spent on the modeling. So yeah, it really, I think you guys are in a great place to kind of get this done quickly and efficiently.
Matthew, do communities ever, so you mentioned like there's a two-part, there's a technical side and then a community engagement side. Do communities you work with, are they ever able to fold that community engagement piece in with other community engagement work that the city may already be engaged in? Like, I'm thinking of like CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, that's HUD money that's we're required to do some engagement with the community in that. Like, can that kind of thing, can you leverage these other processes that we're doing for other governmental requirements? Do you see that happen?
Yeah, that happens more often than it doesn't, I would say, actually.
Okay.
There's not a one way to go about the climate action planning process. I've seen it done in thousands of different ways. It really depends on what makes sense for your leadership, your decision makers, the people doing the work, and the people in the community. To make sure the process is efficient, I would certainly recommend incorporating that into more conversations, and those types of conversations with block grants and things like that, those will help you make the decisions necessary for the modeling, but also for the community engagement portion.
Yeah.
And
sometimes I can sense some like community engagement fatigue. It's the same people showing up to the same rooms, being engaged with all the time, and like, here we go again, kind of.
Yeah.
So
and we see that, and that's not unnormal at all.
Right.
We see that,
Okay.
and I mean, you obviously want to be engaging the people that you engage with mostly because they are extremely helpful in this process, but you really also, this process, we'd highly recommend engaging people that are not normally part of this process because they have insights and feedback and things like that you may not consider.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just a little bit more on the ClearPath, Matthew, I just wanted to let this group know. So how we accumulate, how Matthew did our inventory, we got data from consumers, Semco, the airport, and our wastewater treatment plant. So all the data we collected, now that we have this baseline, a volunteer or someone could plug in more current data as we go to update our greenhouse gas inventory using that ClearPath tool. So Bob did some of that before we started this. He was using a different kind of modeling, but so he's kind of informed on that as well, that if we remain members or become members later, we have that tool available to us that we can kind of do a similar 5 years down the road to see where we stand. So
yeah, and glad you mentioned that, Patty. So yes, and just so you know, even if you decided, if you guys ended membership, all data on ClearPath is always available to non-members. So you can always view it and download it. We never restrict your access to your own data. The only thing that we would restrict as a non-member would be your ability to actually edit and add and manipulate data in the platform. So, we always, I mean, obviously I am biased. I'd recommend membership, obviously. And again, I only briefly touched on the great benefits that we provide for the climate action plan process, but I can have our membership, our Michigan membership advisor provide more information to Patty for her to distribute. But yeah, our ClearPath tool is great. And as it relates to updating inventories, as Patty mentioned, we recommend doing it every 2 to 3 years, 5 years max. However, we'd recommend that you do it after you've established a climate action plan and started implementing strategies so you can monitor where your progress is at. And that process, again, has historically been a little burdensome for some communities. ClearPath makes it a little bit less so, but our new platform that we're pursuing right now that will be available next year is going to make this process extremely more efficient and user-friendly. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I think that gave us a really good background on what you're doing and what you can offer down the road too. So
For sure.
Any more? Kathy, did you have a question for Matthew? I saw your hand up.
I think it kind of got answered. That's fine. Thanks, Patty.
Well, I guess where do we stand from here? Do you want to, now that you've learned a little bit more, kind of consider the science-based targets again and maybe make a decision in the next week or so and kind of put this thing to rest and get it off to City Commission and let them take a look and go from there? Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah. Or, I don't know how much time, I don't know how much time you have today, Patty, if you're wanting to be done, or whether we can use it the next few minutes just talk.
Yeah, sure. Let's get back to that again. Is it this one?
And Patty, I did share with you and Bob the language around the science-based targets, not that specific language, but as it relates to how we generate this. So that information is also very transparent for you all.
Yep, we also that.
Patty, I did have another question if I have a minute.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Thanks, Andy. At the bottom of the document, there was some information about how we're electricity by residents, electricity by industry, electricity by commercial. In that document, when it talked to, there you go, methodology, I think, no. Oh yeah, it says residential electricity. Sorry, I can't see her. It said may include multifamily. Maybe this is kind of a moot question, I'm not sure, but I'm thinking about all of the small apartment complexes and the large complexes we have around here. Those are not, should be included in that count?
Yeah, good question. So our data request goes out to the natural gas and electricity utility, and we request a specific consumption from them, but we also provide a variety of questions for us to better understand what the data represents. One of those questions, as you allude to, Kathy, is about multifamily buildings. Everything that you see there is what SEMCO and the other utility and consumers have communicated to us. So all I have is that information. And while it would be great to have that extremely clear, this is usually the level of clarity that we get from utilities. We're kind of sadly at their will to provide us the information. Yeah, and as it shows there, especially when it goes on to like natural gas, those types of units are those types of dwellings are not specifically categorized and tracked. So yeah, it's kind of hard for us to again get that 100% clarity. So yeah, this is a pretty normal circumstance because utilities aren't really willing to give us more information than the information we're 100% requesting.
So the implication there, then, if I understand it, and Kathy's question is that a multi-family unit may show up in residential or it may show up in commercial, just depending on the the
Yeah.
individual utilities' way of doing business.
Exactly. Yeah, it really
Okay.
depends on the utility, whether if it's by how many meters are attached to the building, how
Okay.
much they consume, things like that. Again,
got
yeah,
you.
it's
Okay.
varies across utilities.
Okay.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, Kathy.
Ed, I just want to make sure that somehow, somewhere in one of these three categories, that all of the apartments, all of the multi-homes are counted for. It's not like we're going to do all this work and then all of a sudden, oops, we forgot the 20,000 apartment units that are out there. I know we wouldn't forget, but hey, we're government. They forget. Is that true then? So all of the, every place that people are living are counted in one of these three?
Yeah, to my best knowledge, everything that's every building that's consuming electricity or natural gas is represented here. Again, we're at the kind of liberty of the utility where they say, here's everything that's happening in your boundary, and may miss something, they may remove something due to privacy laws and whatever. But everything that they've communicated to Patty and I is on this sheet, is represented and communicated.
This is Chris with BCU. I just have a kind of a follow-up. I live out in the country and we have a separate propane company refilling our home. I don't know, being a more urbanized area, there are sections that are rural though. Is that also factored in for other? I know some government might do propane, but I know there's a lot of private ones too. I'm guessing that's probably a small percentage, but I was just thinking about it for heating and appliances.
Yeah, great question. So yeah, we also work with this a lot because again, the diverse amount of governments we support, a lot of them do have what we call non-utility fuels, so propane or kerosene usage, things like that. And yes, this inventory does represent those at the at all sectors levels. So the way we go about that, because we have never been able to get data from smaller propane providers and whatnot because it's proprietary and they refuse to provide it. So the normal approach for this, the standard approach across the United States for this is to estimate it using federal state provided data and then household consumption data. So we basically estimate it using averages. We assume this amount of houses are consuming this, what's the rate of consumption, and then we apply that outwards. So the electricity and natural gas, for more clarity, electricity and natural gas is based on measured usage reported by the utility, and then propane and kerosene, the smaller fuels, are based on estimates from federal data. From federal data, and you were right. Yes, it's an extremely small amount when looking at total emissions, and even looking at each sector emissions.
Thank you.
All right. So Patty, the big decision is what is this science-based target section, right? Like what do we want to say there? What do we want to say is the preliminary 2035 reduction target? Correct? You're on mute. Yeah, this. Patty, we can't hear you. It looks like you were talking, but we can't hear you.
I said a lot that you didn't hear.
I
So
bet.
sorry about that. Yeah, so I said I think we're really close. It's just a little bit of tweaking of the language. The other part of the report is it's the calculations, and there's really not much to change with that. So it's just basically what we want our goal to be. The numbers are really the same. It's just a little bit of tweaking of the language. So
do folks have thoughts on that? Go
Andy,
ahead, Kathy.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Oh, no, Bob, I want to hear what you got to say.
All right,
first.
go ahead, Bob.
All right. Andy, just to clarify, that 2035 goal was something that actually I raised with Matthew. And it came from one of our last meetings where people were talking about it. I think it was in our last meeting over this, where people were talking about 62% by 2030 seemed like a crazy number. Like, you know, that's only 5 years, a little over 5 years away.
Right.
So I had raised that with Matthew, and I think I might have sent it to you and Patty too as an email, was the same. Well, what if we tried to scale this out 5 years so that we could have a little more time to catch up? It wasn't something that ICLEI built into the program.
Right.
They were doing that to accommodate us. So just a clarification. That's why that's there.
And I can just add some more context, Bob. So the reason why this technically, if you look at the math, doesn't work out, is because if we were to take a linear pathway from the 2030 target to 2050, it actually would be less reduction, because again, you're going from the highest peak to zero, right? So I mean, we can take the rate of change to get to from 62.9% to 100%. But again, the reason that doesn't really make sense is because it's based off of the fact that you've already done that by 2030. So what I'd recommend doing, if you want to find a middle ground and you still want to be ambitious, I would just recommend doing that 62.9% by 2035. Make it easiest on everyone. Just say, again, that's not technically a science-based. It's not technically under the strict definitions of science-based target because they have to be 2030 targets. But you can say, we want to move this by 5 years and pursue this target. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. Based on the conversation I've had with Patty and Bob, it seems like, again, you want an ambitious target, but you don't want to be that aggressive because the timeline's already 5 years. So if you wanted my recommendation at this very point, I would just do that 62.9% by 2035. Because again, if we were to take that linear change, it would actually be, I'm not gonna dive into that, but yeah, you understand what I'm trying to say.
Right. Yes. Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
And again, remember about 40% if regulations and policies are on track, we'll already be 40% of the way, probably with the state of Michigan, energy
Right.
policy. So,
And I think what I'm wondering, Patty, talking about which section of language you use, is what if you literally just that statement? It's like in the second paragraph of the second alternative choice, the above basic forecast indicates a potential 40% reduction under a business use scenario. What if you just took that one sentence and used it in the first the current language, just to restate for people, because essentially that's just a restatement of the section above, right?
Mhm.
So, what if just that statement was placed in the middle of that first paragraph of the current science-based target before the 62.9 sentence?
Okay. Yep.
Do you see what I mean? Like,
I
just to
do.
remind people, and maybe instead of above, it actually references a page number, because it's been a
Okay.
while, right? This is a few pages back. I think
Right.
above might confuse people. It confused me for a second. Oh, no, they meant above.
Yep.
So yeah, so smack in the middle of that paragraph right before the sentence. So, based on, just so now I can see, okay, if business as usual is 40%, science-based target would be 62.9 by whatever the year we're going to say,
2035.
and zero emissions by 2050. Period.
Okay.
And again, it can be, my opinion is that it could be ambitious, because again, we're as we've worked through this and we've come to understand it more, this is a report. This isn't the city coming up with a plan and coming up with goals and benchmarks and how to get from here to there and all that. So really all we want from this report is to give us the situation. Like, yes, in order to meet Paris, it's the number is 62.9. That's what it is. We can argue later about how we're going to get there or not get there or what, but this is the number.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And we also
Kathy,
included that. Go
ahead.
I would say we also incorporated that the last two sentences at the bottom of the email, just to kind of communicate that these are not committed. These are just targets being explored.
Yes. Yeah. At this time, the target Yes. Yeah.
So I can combine the middle paragraphs that you mentioned, Andy, as well as the bottom one, and can combine it with the top text, and then do that 2030 target, but change that to 2035. And that seems like that's going to address your concerns.
I think so. That I don't want to speak for everyone, but that's just, yeah, doing that I think encapsulates our what we talked about previously. Does any other members here have comments or questions to that effect? Kathy?
Thanks, Andy. So I support us taking or recommending or writing in some audacious goals. I'm totally on board with that, especially once I heard about we're already, if we just continue with business as usual, going to get to 40% reduction anyways. And I have two concerns in regards to that. So first of all, knowing how fast or slow and that's a big that we roll, I think it makes a lot of sense for us to say 2035 as opposed to 2030. I think those folks who are going to want to put the brakes on or are going to go kicking and screaming into this plan are going to find 2035 more doable than 2030. So I support that change. And I'm only a little concerned when I think about what's already going to happen, whether we do anything or not, 40% reduction based on state and federal changes. Is that going to leave us a lot of wiggle room for us to do that? I mean, how much is that 20%? Is that going to be a bigger lift now? Because the lower hanging fruit have already been covered by federal and state requirements? Is that now that last 20% going to be a real heavy lift for us? I didn't hear any of that discussion. Am I smoking something funny and I don't understand what's going on? Or
I can provide some more insight into this. So great question. So let me just first reiterate that we're introducing this concept of where we may be at with this projection, because looking at 63%, whatever it may be, starting at zero is scary, right? And we want to make sure people feel like, yes, our systems are working and they're in place for us for us to generally have some reduction, but then to actually pursue more strategies to reduce. And again, I do want to make it clear that it's a potential result. It's just a projection. These numbers are based on state and federal laws. So Kathy, when you mentioned like efficiency and things like that, those are not included. So those low-hanging fruit, that's not included in this projection. What is included is population change, CAFE standards, which is just federal fuel efficiency laws. So vehicles need to be more efficient. And then Michigan's projection for your state grid. So your grid is becoming cleaner because Michigan's state government has required utilities to pursue renewables and non-carbon sources. So those three things are the only things being considered here. So the low-hanging fruit of efficiency, I guess we can categorize them as such, but the low-hanging fruit is not represented here. So that 20%, I'd let you decide on if that's hard or not. I would say it's right in the middle of, there's going to be a lot of easier things to address, and there's going to be a lot of harder things to address. So I wouldn't necessarily say that 20% is going to be the most difficult thing, but just kind of approach that as that's our responsibility. Obviously, the responsibility is the entire reduction, not just that 20%, but you can kind of see it as, yes, if things go forward correctly and as planned, then that's the reduction. We've seen states where they have a renewable portfolio standard, they're going to reduce them. The grid is going to be less intensive, and then the state totally stops it from happening, and therefore your ability to get there is more difficult. Now, I don't see a state like Michigan doing that, so it's good to continuously communicate this, but it's also good to draw the distinction between what you need to do versus what you're technically relying on versus what technically may not happen. Does that make sense? Cool.
Yeah. Okay, I want to just a time check here, Patty. Regardless of our desire or ability to stay and chat more, and there might be some hard stops on the communication folks, and so if this was the planned amount of time we allotted for the meeting, I want to
Yes.
honor this staff folks' time. Do you have enough then to revise to revise this section of the Patty?
Yes, and Matthew's shaking his head
okay.
yes too. So I think this was really helpful, and I'll let Matthew make the edits, and then we can do a last review with everyone. And
Yeah, I know there was Bob and I talked about a couple things. Bob, just email those, Bob. I had a couple of just detailed, things. I'll just email those. If someone else, if you've been reading through it, you have questions about particular little things here and there, just email them to Patty. Do so sooner than later though, right? Like get those to Patty today or
Yeah.
tomorrow.
yeah, that would be great.
It's a public meeting. We do have to ask for public comment. Erica, is there any public comment showing up?
We have no public comment and no one in our waiting room.
All right, thank you. All right then. Are we good then, Patty?
I think so. Yes. Thanks all for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Matthew, for showing up. I think you explain it way, way better than I can.
Yeah, thank you much, Matthew. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. Great questions and discussion. It feels like we're moving forward in good ways here.
Oh,
all right,
Yeah,
thank you. Yep. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Patty.
Matthew.
And city folks. And the meeting we will adjourn at 2:34. Thanks all.